He didn't say a word when she came out of surgery. Nora stood in the hallway of Toronto General, still in her recovery gown, one hand gripping the IV pole because her legs hadn't caught up with the rest of her yet. The surgeon had just told her the tumor was benign, 43 years old, and she had spent the last 6 weeks believing she was dying. 6 weeks of quiet terror, of holding her coffee mug with both hands every morning just to feel something solid. And now it was over. She was going to live. Her husband Callum, no, not Callum, that name is in the file. Her husband Fletcher, no. Her husband Reed, no. She had called him 4 times from the pre-op room. He hadn't answered any of them. Vivienne Hargrove found out she had a brain tumor on a Tuesday in February, the kind of Tuesday that feels like it has no color. The sky was that flat gray that settles over Lake Ontario in winter and refuses to move. She had gone to the appointment alone because her husband, Sutton Hargrove, had told her the morning before that he had a board meeting he couldn't reschedule. She had nodded. She had said, of course. She had driven herself to St. Michael's Hospital and sat in a paper gown on a table that crinkled every time she shifted her weight, and she had listened to Dr. Pauline Okafor explain what they had found on the MRI. We'll need to do a biopsy, Dr. Okafor said. But I want to be honest with you. The location and the density suggest we should move quickly. Vivienne had asked all the right questions. She had written down the answers in the small notebook she always kept in her purse, the one with blue cover that Otter had bought her at a shop in Montreal when they were still the kind of couple who took weekend trips to Montreal. She had thanked Dr. Okafor. She had walked to the parking garage, sat in her car for 11 minutes, and then driven home. Sutton was already back from his board meeting when she arrived. He was in the kitchen, standing at the island with his laptop open, scrolling through something that made him frown slightly. He looked up when she came in. He said, "How'd it go?" she told him. He listened. He closed his laptop. He said, "Okay, well, let's not panic until we have more information." That was the moment, though she wouldn't understand it as a moment for a long time, not until everything else had already happened, that something shifted in her chest. Not dramatically. Not like something breaking. More like a door closing very quietly in a house you thought you knew. She did not panic. She scheduled the biopsy. She told her daughter, Simone, who drove up from Hamilton the same day, and sat with her on the back porch for 3 hours drinking tea and saying almost nothing, which was exactly what Vivienne needed. She told her assistant at work, Priya. No, that name is taken. She told her assistant, Delphine Arcand, who rearranged Vivienne's entire calendar without being asked, and then left a container of homemade soup on her desk, with a note that just said, "I've got you." She did not tell her mother-in-law. She did not tell Sutton's business partners. She did not post anything on social media, because Vivienne Hargrove had spent 42 years watching other people perform their grief online, and she had no interest in starting now. What she did do in those 6 weeks between diagnosis and surgery was notice things she had been too busy to notice before. She noticed that Sutton's phone was always face down on whatever surface he set it on. She noticed that he had started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, 3 times a week, when for 11 years of marriage, he had said he was not a morning person. She noticed that when she reached for his hand across the dinner table, sometimes he moved it to pick up his glass before her fingers could close around his. Small things. The kind of things you could explain away if you were trying to. Vivienne was not trying to anymore. She had grown up in a house in Oakville where her mother explained everything away, every single thing, until there was nothing left to explain. She had promised herself at 17 that she would not be that woman. She had mostly kept that promise except for the years she had let herself be distracted by the very good life Sutton Hargrove provided. The house in Forest Hill, the cottage on Georgian Bay, the dinners with people whose names appeared in the business section of the Globe and Mail. She had let herself be comfortable. Comfort, she was learning, had a way of making you temporarily blind. The biopsy came back on a Wednesday. Dr. Okafor called her directly, which Vivienne had requested. The tumor was a meningioma. Operable. "You're going to be fine, doctor," Okafor said, and her voice had the particular warmth of someone who doesn't say that unless they mean it. Vivienne sat in the sunroom of her Forest Hill house and felt the relief move through her body like warm water. Then she picked up her phone to call Sutton. He didn't answer. She called again. Nothing. She texted. Results came in. It's benign. They want to schedule surgery for next month. 3 minutes passed. 5. 8. His reply came 11 minutes later. Great news. Talk tonight. She read it twice. Then she put her phone down on the glass table and watched a cardinal land on the bare branch of the maple tree outside, and she thought, I almost died, and my husband responded, like I'd told him the dry cleaning was ready. She did not cry. She made herself a cup of tea, sat back down in the sunroom, and opened the notebook with the blue cover to a fresh page. She started writing down everything she had noticed. The surgery was scheduled for the last week of March. Vivienne told almost no one. She told Simone, who took 2 days off work and drove back up to stay with her. She told Delphine. She told her oldest friend, a woman named Cressida Falk, who had known her since their first year at Queen's University, and who responded by showing up at Vivienne's door with an overnight bag and a bottle of very good whiskey. She did not tell Sutton until 3 days before. They were in the kitchen again. He was at the island again. She set her phone down on the counter, looked at him, and said, The surgery is Thursday. He looked up. Something moved across his face. She watched it carefully, the way you watch a stranger's face when you're trying to understand something about them. It looked like calculation. Not concern, calculation. Thursday, he repeated. I have the Meridian Capital pitch on Thursday morning. I know, she said. I checked your calendar. A pause. I can try to move it. Don't, she said. Simone's coming. Cressida's coming. I'll be fine. He looked relieved, and he tried to hide it, and he was not good enough at hiding it. That night, after he fell asleep, Vivienne lay on her side of their king-sized bed and thought about the first time she had met Sutton Hargrove. She had been 29, newly promoted to Director of Acquisitions at Beaumont Capital, and he had been the most confident man in the room at a charity gala in the distillery district. He had walked up to her mid-conversation with someone else and said, without any preamble, You're the smartest person here. I've been watching the room for 20 minutes. She had laughed. She had said, That's an unusual opening. He had said, I'm an unusual person, and she had believed him. She still believed it, she supposed, just not in the way she used to. She fell asleep thinking about the cottage on Georgian Bay, about how, when they'd bought it 15 years ago, they had stood on the dock together at 10 o'clock at night and looked at the stars and felt like people who had everything. She had loved him then with something that felt like certainty. She wasn't sure when certainty had become habit, and habit had become silence. The morning of the surgery, Sutton was gone before she woke up. There was a note on his pillow. It said, Good luck today. Call me when you're out. Simone found it before Vivienne did. She didn't say anything. She just folded it in half and set it face down on the nightstand, and she helped her mother get dressed, and she drove her to the hospital. Vivienne was in surgery for 4 hours and 20 minutes. When she came out, groggy and slow and blinking against the fluorescent lights of the recovery room, the first face she saw was Simone's. Her daughter had been crying, the kind of crying you do when the fear finally releases, red-eyed and a little undone. And she was holding Vivienne's hand before Vivienne even fully understood where she was. It went well, Simone said. Dr. Okafor says it went perfectly. Vivienne squeezed her daughter's hand. She tried to say something, but her mouth was dry and the words didn't come out properly. It didn't matter. Simone understood. Sutton arrived at the hospital at 7:30 that evening. By then Vivienne had been moved to a private room. She was awake. She had eaten half a bowl of soup. Cressida had been there for 2 hours and was on her second coffee from the Tim Hortons down the street. Simone was sitting in the chair by the window, scrolling through her phone. Sutton walked in wearing his good coat, the charcoal one, and she knew from the particular way he carried himself that the pitch had gone well. He had the look of a man who had won something. Hey, he said. He came to the side of the bed. He looked at her bandaged head, at the IV, at the monitor tracking her vitals. How are you feeling? Alive, she said. He gave a short laugh. Good, yeah, good. He stayed for 45 minutes. He answered 2 texts from his phone while he was there. When he left, he kissed her on the forehead. The way you kiss someone, you've already started to leave. And said he'd come back in the morning. He did not come back in the morning. What arrived in the morning, delivered by a man in a gray suit, who handed an envelope to Simone in the hallway and said he was sorry, was a letter from the offices of Drummond, Price & Associates. Vivian's husband had filed for divorce. The papers cited irreconcilable differences. The filing date was 2 weeks ago, before the surgery, before she had even known the exact date. He had filed while she was waiting to find out if she would survive the year, and he had said nothing, and he had let her go into surgery, and he had arrived at the hospital in his good coat, and he had kissed her on the forehead. Simone came into the room with the envelope still unopened, and her face was doing something Vivian hadn't seen since Simone was 12 years old and the family dog had died. A particular kind of controlled devastation. "Mum," she said, "I need you to stay calm." Vivian opened the envelope herself. She read the first page, then the second. Her hands were perfectly steady, which surprised her. She had expected them to shake. But there is a kind of shock that bypasses the body entirely and goes straight to the part of you that already knew. She set the papers down on the blanket. "How long has he been working with Drummond Price?" she asked. Simone blinked. "What? Drummond Price and Associates? How long? I don't know. Mum, are you?" "I'm fine," Vivian said, and she meant it, which was strange. "I need to make a phone call." She asked Simone and Cressida to give her 10 minutes. They went out into the hallway, and she could hear them talking in low, urgent voices through the door, and she picked up her phone and called a number she had put in her contacts 6 weeks ago. The number belonged to a woman named Tatum Osi Asante. Tatum Osi Asante was the senior partner at one of the most respected family law firms in Ontario. She was 51 years old. She had graduated first in her class from Osgoode Hall Law School. She had the kind of reputation that other lawyers mentioned when they wanted to explain what being very good at your job actually looked like. Vivian had retained her 2 weeks ago. The same week she had started writing things down in the blue notebook. "I've been expecting your call," Tatum said. "He filed," Vivian said. "I know. I was notified this morning." A brief pause. "How are you physically?" "Surgery went well. I'm in hospital." "Good. Then here's what I need you to do." "Nothing. Sign nothing. Respond to nothing. Let me handle the communication from this point. Do you understand?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Can I ask you one thing?" "Of course. Has he done anything about the Beaumont properties?" There was a pause on the other end that lasted just long enough to tell her everything. "Not yet," Tatum said, "but we should talk about that today. Can you manage a video call this afternoon?" "I can manage anything I need to manage," Vivian said. She was not wrong about that. Here is something Sutton Hargrove had never bothered to fully understand about his wife, perhaps because she had never seen the point in explaining it. Vivian had not come to their marriage with nothing. She had come with a trust established by her grandmother, Adeline Beaumont, who had been the kind of woman who believed that money was most powerful when it was invisible. The trust held, among other assets, 4 properties in Ontario, 2 in the city, 1 in Muskoka, 1 just outside Stratford, that had been in the Beaumont family since the 1960s. The combined value of those properties, as of the most recent assessment, was just under $4 million. The Forest Hill house, the one they lived in, was one of them. Sutton's name was not on the title. It had never been on the title. This had been, 11 years ago, a point of significant tension between them. Sutton had wanted his name on the house. He had presented arguments, logical ones, about investment and commitment, and what it meant to be a family. Vivian had listened to all of them. She had said with the particular gentleness she used when she was not going to change her mind, "It was my grandmother's. I want to keep it in the family." He had let it go. People let things go when they believe they have time. He did not have time. The cottage on Georgian Bay was also a Beaumont property. It was also not in his name. Sutton Hargrove had, over the course of their marriage, come to think of himself as a man of considerable assets. He had the investment portfolio. He had the equity in the Meridian Capital Fund he had built with 2 partners. He had the car, the savings, the reputation. What he did not have, it turned out, was as much as he thought. His lawyer, a man named Whitmore, whom Vivian had never liked for reasons she had never been able to fully articulate, but now understood entirely, contacted Tatum's office on a Thursday. Vivian was home by then, recovering in the sunroom, which she had taken to calling the war room in her head, even though she never said it out loud. She was on her 3rd week of medical leave. She was sleeping well. She was eating properly. Simone had stayed for the 1st week and was now calling twice a day. Cressida was coming on weekends. Vivienne felt, for the first time in a very long time, like herself. Whitmore's opening offer was what Tatum had predicted. An attempt to split the marital assets down the middle on paper, while quietly assuming the Forest Hill house and the cottage would be included in that calculation. It was, Tatum explained over a video call, a strategy that depended entirely on Sutton not knowing what he didn't know. He did not know what he didn't know. He's assuming the house is a marital asset, Tatum said. He's built his entire settlement position on that assumption. And when he finds out it isn't? Vivienne asked. Tatum smiled. It was a small, precise smile. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Would you like to be present? Vivienne thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said. The meeting was held at Tatum's office on Bay Street on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. Toronto had finally decided it was spring. There were tulips in the planters outside the office building, red and yellow, aggressively cheerful. Vivienne arrived early. She wore the dark blue blazer she had bought the week before she started at Beaumont Capital, the one that still fit perfectly, the one that had always made her feel like the most capable person in the room. She sat at the conference table across from 2 empty chairs and drank water and breathed. Sutton arrived with Whitmore. He did not look at her when he came in, and then he did, and she saw the thing she'd been waiting to see, the flicker of something. Surprised that she looked so well. Something else underneath it that she didn't spend much time trying to name. She nodded at him. He nodded back. They sat down. Whitmore began with the position Tatum had anticipated. He spoke with the confident efficiency of a man who believed this was already settled, who was here as a formality. He used the word equitable 4 times in the first 5 minutes. He referred to the Forest Hill property twice, in the context of how the proceeds would be divided. Tatum let him finish. Then she opened the folder in front of her, slid 3 documents across the table, and said in the conversational tone of someone commenting on the weather, "The Forest Hill property is held in trust by the Beaumont Family Trust, established 1987. Ms. Hargrove is the sole beneficiary. It is not a marital asset under the Family Law Act. Neither is the Georgian Bay cottage, held under the same trust instrument." Silence. Whitmore picked up the documents. He read, he set them down, he picked them up again. Sutton said nothing. He was very still. She had seen him do this before, go very still when something wasn't going the way he had planned. She had spent years finding it impressive. Now she just found it interesting. "This wasn't disclosed," Whitmore said finally. "It was not a marital asset," Tatum said pleasantly. "It didn't require disclosure. It's in the name of the trust. You could have found this with a land title search at any point in the last 11 years. Vivienne looked at her husband across the table. She watched him recalculate. She had seen him do this in business meetings. That particular internal pivot, the way his jaw set slightly differently when a room had shifted and he needed to find the new angle. She had admired it once. She had thought it was strength. "Sutton," she said. It was the first time she had spoken in the meeting. He looked at her. "The house that you were planning to sell," she said. "The cottage you were planning to include in the settlement. The property in Stratford that I don't think you even knew existed." She paused. "None of it was ever yours." He opened his mouth. He closed it. She said, "I want you to understand that I'm not angry. I've had a lot of time to stop being angry." She folded her hands on the table. "What I want you to understand is that you filed for divorce while I was in hospital recovering from brain surgery. And you did it using a lawyer who built his case on an asset that was never on the table, and I need you to know that I noticed both of those things." The room was very quiet. Outside, through the glass on the far wall, Toronto went about its afternoon. Whitmore said something to Sutton in a low voice. Sutton gave a short, tight nod. What happened over the following 6 weeks was less dramatic than Vivienne had expected and exactly as thorough. Tatum was methodical. Sutton's actual assets, the portfolio, his share of the Meridian Fund, the savings, were divided according to the Act. With adjustments for the years Vivienne had contributed to his professional reputation in ways that don't show up neatly on paper but are well understood by judges in Ontario family courts. The settlement was fair. It was not generous to him. He moved into a condo in Liberty Village. She heard this from Simone, who had heard it from someone else. The Forest Hill house felt different after he left. Bigger, which she had expected, but also quieter in a way that was not unpleasant. She started leaving her notebooks on the kitchen island. She started cooking things that took too long and made too much mess, because she had always liked cooking that way, and he had always found it inefficient. She started sleeping in the middle of the bed. In June, Delphine brought coffee to their morning check-in and set it down and said, "Can I say something that's none of my business?" Vivienne said. "Please, you seem like yourself again," Delphine said. "You seem like the version of yourself from before I started working here, which I only know from photos and from how other people talk about you. But that's who you seem like." Vivienne thought about that for a long time after Delphine left. She thought about the woman who had stood at the dock at Georgian Bay at 10 o'clock at night and looked at the stars and felt like someone who had everything. She had not been wrong, exactly. She had been looking at the wrong list. The cottage was hers. It had always been hers. In July, she drove up alone on a Friday afternoon. She stopped at a place in Barrie for gas and a coffee. She arrived just as the light was going golden over the water. That particular July light that makes everything look like it has been asked to be beautiful and has agreed. She stood on the dock for a long time. The lake was calm. The neighbors' kids were somewhere down the shore, and she could hear them distantly, laughing at something. A loon called from across the bay, and something in her chest answered it. She had almost died. She had not. She had lost something that had started leaving before she knew it was going. She was standing on a dock that her grandmother had walked on, in a life that was, in every way that actually mattered, entirely her own. She went inside. She made herself dinner. She ate it on the porch as the sky went dark, watching the first stars come out over the bay one by one, and she did not feel like a woman who had lost anything at all.